The old mountains breathed. Luna felt it in the soles of her boots, a slow, deep shudder that had nothing to do with tectonic plates. For 3 weeks, her seismographs had been painting a picture of impossibility. The tremors plaguing the spine of the Appalachians weren't the sharp, jagged signatures of shifting rock, but the rhythmic, resonant pulse of a colossal heartbeat. Her colleagues in Asheville called it equipment malfunction. Luna, standing on a lonely ridge with the scent of pine and damp earth in her nostrils, knew it was something else. She was a geologist, a woman of data and fact, yet the mountain was whispering a story she couldn't rationalize. A recent landslide, a fresh wound of red clay and splintered oak on the mountainside, had revealed a fissure that wasn't on any of her topographical maps. It was a dark maw, exhaling a cool, mineral-scented breath. Logic told her to wait, to call it in, to assemble a team. But the thrumming in the earth was stronger here, a siren song for the curious. Clipping a high-lumen headlamp to her helmet, Luna squeezed through the opening, leaving the world of sun and sky behind. The passage was tight, scraping against her pack, but it soon opened into a space that stole her breath. This was no ordinary cavern. The darkness was alive with light. Veins of soft turquoise luminescence webbed across the walls, pulsing in perfect synchrony with the tremors she had been tracking. Great crystalline growths, like geodes the size of automobiles, sprouted from the floor, their facets catching and refracting the glow. Bioluminescent fungi clung in ghostly chandeliers from the ceiling, dripping silver motes of light into the still, heavy air. It smelled of wet stone, ozone, and something else, something ancient and wild, like the air before a storm.
Deeper she went, drawn by the intensifying pulse. Her instruments were useless here. The energy in the air made her compass spin wildly and her GPS signal vanish. She was guided only by the thrumming that vibrated up through her bones, a feeling less heard than felt. In the heart of the largest chamber, a colossal crystal formation dominated the space, its light the source of the cavern's lifeblood. It pulsed with the slow, steady rhythm of a sleeping titan. As Luna reached out a hand instinctively to touch its impossibly smooth surface, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness.
It was a panther, impossibly large, its coat the color of a starless midnight. It moved with a liquid grace that made no sound on the crystalline floor. Its form seemed to blur at the edges, less a creature of flesh and more a confluence of living shadow. The only points of concrete reality were its eyes, two burning embers that fixed on her, pinning her in place. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Luna. She froze, her hand hovering inches from the glowing crystal. Then the creature shifted. The shadows that comprised it flowed and coalesced, rising upward, elongating. The feline form dissolved into a tall humanoid shape. He was lean and powerful, his skin the dark, rich color of obsidian, seeming to absorb the cavern's light. Tattoos or scars, glowing with a faint fiery light, coiled around his arms. His face was sharp, angular, and ancient, framed by hair as black as a panther's pelt. But the eyes were the same, fierce, intelligent, and burning with an internal fire.
"You do not belong here, surface dweller."
His voice was a low growl, resonating with the same deep frequency as the mountain's pulse. Luna, a scientist to her core, found her voice, though it trembled.
What are you?"
"I am Karu Zen. I am the sentinel of this place.
and you have trespassed upon the heart of the world."
Luna took a step back, her boots crunching softly. She held up her hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "I'm a geologist. I was tracking seismic activity. These tremors, they're not natural."
Karu Zhen let out a low, humorless laugh. It was the sound of rock grinding against rock.
"Science gives names to things it cannot comprehend. You track a heartbeat and call it a tremor. You see a god sleeping and call it a mountain."
He moved closer, his fiery eyes scanning her from head to toe. He stopped just feet from her, his presence an oppressive weight in the air. He was a being of shadow and fire, just as the ancient legends she dismissed as folklore had described. "Why are you here? The heart pulse should not call to your kind."
"I don't know. I just felt it. It pulled me here. I had to understand it." Karu's expression shifted from suspicion to a deep, probing curiosity. He gestured toward the great, pulsing heart crystal.
"Touch it."
"What? No, touch it. The mountain will know its own." Hesitantly, Luna turned and pressed her palm against the crystal surface. It was warm, smooth as polished glass, and vibrating with immense power. The moment her skin made contact, the entire cavern flared with brilliant white light. A torrent of images and feelings flooded her mind. Eons of silence, the slow crawl of glaciers, the rise and fall of ancient forests, the quiet, dreaming thoughts of the earth itself. The power surged up her arm, a jolt of pure life that made her gasp. Karu Zhen watched, his fiery eyes wide with a dawning understanding. The light subsided, leaving Luna breathless and leaning against the crystal for support. The cavern returned to its soft, turquoise pulsing. "It is true. The blood has awakened."
What was that? What blood?"
"You carry the blood of the mountain, child, an ancient lineage, thinned by generations but never broken. Your ancestors made pacts with my kind, the Thrallkin. They were keepers of the old ways, bridges between the soil and the sky. You are the first in 1,000 years to hear the heartbeat so clearly."
Before Luna could process the impossible revelation, a violent tremor shook the cavern. This was different, dissonant, and sharp. Dust and small crystals rained from the ceiling. A high-pitched whining sound filled the air, and across the chamber, the very fabric of reality seemed to shimmer and tear. The soft glow was replaced by a sickly violet light emanating from a newly formed rift in the rock wall. "The veil! It tears! The sleeper's nightmares are breaking through!" From the shimmering tier, things began to emerge. They were not solid, but formed of shadow and mist, their shapes vaguely humanoid but twisted, with too many limbs and faces contorted in silent screams. They were spirits, but not the benevolent kind from fairy tales. They were hungry, forgotten things, drawn by the life of the waking mountain. Karu moved with blurring speed. "Get behind me!" he roared. The shadows in the cavern coalesced around him, clothing him in an armor of darkness. His hands ignited with black fire. He became a whirlwind of destruction, a sentinel holding the line against chaos. He lunged, tearing through the misty forms, his fiery claws dissipating them into shrieking vapor. But for every one he destroyed, 2 more seeped through the weakening veil. One of the spirits, a spindly creature of grasping, smoky tendrils, broke past him and darted towards Luna. She cried out, stumbling backward, her mind screaming at the impossibility of it all. As the creature reached for her, she threw her hands up defensively. The heart crystal behind her pulsed violently, and a wave of pure turquoise light erupted from her, slamming into the spirit and vaporizing it instantly. The backlash threw her to the ground. Karoo dispatched the last of the spirits and spun around, his fiery gaze on her. With a final, desperate effort, he slammed his palms against the rock on either side of the rift. The glowing sigils on his skin flared, and he uttered a guttural incantation. The tear in the veil wavered, resisted, and then slowly sealed shut, leaving only a scar of blackened rock. Karoo slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. The black fire on his hands subsided, and the shadows receded. He looked drained, the ancient power in his eyes dimmed for a moment. That was a warning. The great sleeper below stirs. Its dreams have always been the substance of the veil, but now its nightmares are given form. The barrier cannot hold. I destroyed one of them. The mountain protects its own. You channeled its power. You see now? Your purpose is not in tracking tremors, Luna. It is in healing them. He pushed himself off the wall and walked towards her, his exhaustion replaced by a grim resolve. He stood over her, his shadow falling across her. For centuries, I have been the last, the panther sentinel, guarding this heart alone. My kin, the Thrawn kin, the Veilborn, have scattered. They have forgotten their duty. Some hide in the deepest parts of the earth. Others walk disguised among your kind. They have grown deaf to the heartbeat. What can you do? What we must do. I am the fist, but you are the voice that can call them home. Your blood resonates with the ley lines, the veins of this world. You can feel where they are. I cannot do this alone. I must reunite the Veilborn, or the world above will be consumed by the dreams of what sleeps below. He offered her a hand, his palm marked with the same glowing fiery sigils as his arms. It was a choice. She could take his hand and step into a world of myth and terror, or she could refuse, run back to the surface, and try to forget the living mountain and the nightmares that seeped from its dreams. Her entire life, her career, her understanding of the universe was built on logic and tangible proof. Yet she had just seen the impossible. She had just done the impossible. Looking at his burning eyes, she saw not a monster, but a desperate, lonely guardian fighting a losing war. The thrum of the mountain in her own veins was an undeniable truth. She took his hand. His skin was cool like stone, but a fire burned deep within it. Together, they walked from the heart chamber, back through the glowing passages toward the world of sunlight. When they emerged from the fissure, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountains. The air was crisp, the world deceptively peaceful. Karoo Zhen surveyed the endless rolling peaks, his gaze distant. Where do we start? Karoo raised a hand, pointing toward the highest, most distant peak, its summit wreathed in clouds. We start with the one who has forgotten the earth by embracing the sky. We find Kaelis, the Sky Warden, and we remind him of the ground he once swore to protect. And how do we get there? It's 100 miles of rough terrain. It would take a week to hike, assuming there's even a trail. The question was instinctual, a geologist's assessment of distance and topography. It felt absurdly normal after the reality-shattering events in the cavern. For a moment, she was just a scientist planning a field expedition. Karoo turned his burning gaze from the peak to her. There was something akin to pity in his eyes. Your kind crawls upon the earth's skin. We walk in its veins. The paths you see are not the only ones that exist. Stay close. What you are about to experience may feel unsettling. Before Luna could ask what he meant, Karoo stepped into the long shadow cast by a monolithic boulder and vanished, not with a pop or a flash of light, but as if the shadow had simply drunk him in. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs. She took a hesitant step forward, her own shadow merging with the boulder's. His voice echoed, seeming to come not from the shadow itself, but from within it, a place without dimension. The way is open. Trust the blood in your veins. It remembers the way, even if you do not. Trust. It was a commodity she usually reserved for peer-reviewed data and calibrated instruments. Now she had to place it in a shadow-walking panther guardian and the mythical blood he claimed she possessed. Taking a deep breath that did little to calm her, Luna stepped into the shade. The world dissolved. There was no sensation of falling, no feeling of movement at all. It was a complete sensory deprivation, a quiet, cool nothingness that pressed in on all sides. The vibrant, living thrum of the mountain was gone, replaced by an utter silence that was more profound than any she had ever known. Fear, primal and disorienting, began to prickle at the edges of her mind. She was untethered, a mote of dust in an infinite void. Then she remembered Karoo's words, "Trust the blood." She closed her eyes in the absolute darkness and focused inward, past the panic, searching for the feeling she'd had when she touched the heart crystal. She sought the deep, resonant pulse. For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then a faint glimmer. A tiny turquoise thread of light, visible only in her mind's eye. It was the ley line, the vein of the world he'd spoken of. It stretched out before her in the emptiness, a single glowing pathway. Holding on to that image, she willed herself forward. The nothingness gave way to a rushing torrent of gray mist and fractured images. She saw glimpses of rock strata, the tangled roots of ancient trees, seams of coal and glittering veins of quartz, all blurring past her at an impossible speed. It was as if she were traveling through the geological soul of the mountain range. This was not a shadow. It was a shortcut, a path that existed between the ticks of a clock, in the space between atoms. Just as the disorientation threatened to overwhelm her, she felt solid ground beneath her feet. She stumbled forward, blinking, into the thin, cold air of a high-altitude evening. The sun was gone, replaced by a sky choked with more stars than she had ever seen. They were sharp, diamond-hard points of light in the bruised purple twilight. They had traveled 100 miles in a matter of moments. Breathe. The Sky Warden's domain is thin. It lacks substance. Karoo stood nearby, a silhouette against the star-dusted horizon. They were on a narrow, wind-swept ridge, far higher than where they had started. The peak Karoo had pointed to was no longer a distant smudge. It was a jagged fang of granite that tore at the sky directly above them, its summit still wrapped in a shroud of unnaturally still clouds. The wind that whipped around them carried no scent of pine or earth, only the sterile, biting chill of the upper atmosphere. Lacks substance? It's rock. It's the most solid thing there is. She stamped a booted foot on the ground to prove her point. The stone felt hollow, not geologically hollow, but spiritually. The deep thrum of the great sleeper was almost completely gone here. A faint, distant vibration she could only feel because she was now attuned to it. Kalis has spent millennia trying to unmoor himself from the world. He shaves the stone of its memory, polishes the peaks until they forget the heart they grew from. He believes elevation is purity. He is a fool. There was a bitterness in Karoo's tone that went beyond mere disapproval. It was the sound of a deep, old betrayal. He started up the ridge, his movement sure-footed and economical. a creature perfectly at home in the harsh landscape. Why did he leave? Why would one of you just abandon your duty? Karoo didn't look back. His voice carried back to her on the thin wind. The sleeper's dreams are not always nightmares. In the eons of quiet, its dreams were of creation, of starlight and nebulae, of the vast, silent emptiness between worlds. Kalias fell in love with the dream of the void. He began to see the earth, the duty, the heartbeat as a cage. He chose the purity of emptiness over the messy reality of life. He guards the sky, he says, but what he truly does is hide from the world. They climbed in silence for what felt like hours. The ascent was unnervingly easy. The rock seemed to offer handholds and footholds exactly where needed. The steep inclines were never quite as treacherous as they appeared. It was, Luna realized, a path designed to be climbed, leading ever upward. It was a lure, an invitation into his domain, on his terms. As they neared the cloud line, the wind began to speak. It wasn't the mindless howl of air over rock, but a sibilant whispering that coiled around their ears, plucking at their thoughts. It whispered of failure to Luna, of her faulty equipment, her dismissed theories, the years of academic struggle. It whispered of loneliness to Karoo, of long centuries spent in darkness, of forgotten kin and a failing vigil. They were insidious, personal barbs designed to unbalance them. Is this him? Is he doing this? It is the mountain's breath which has become his. Do not listen. It is the echo of your own doubts given voice. He cannot make new fears, only amplify those you already carry. Luna focused again on the thread of power within her, the connection to the deep earth. She imagined it as an anchor, a heavy weight holding her mind steady against the whispering gales. The voices faded, unable to find purchase. She looked at Karoo and saw him doing the same, his posture unyielding, a bulwark of shadow and resolve against the ethereal assault. They finally pushed through the layer of clouds and stepped out onto the summit. The sight drove the breath from Luna's lungs. There was no peak. The granite mountaintop simply ended, sheared off clean. Above it, floating perhaps 100 feet in the air, was an island of stone and crystal, held aloft by nothing at all. A waterfall of pure, white clouds spilled silently over its edge. The stars above were brilliant, unobscured, and seemed close enough to touch. This was the Eyrie of the Sky Warden. A bridge, woven from what looked like solidified wind and moonlight, shimmered into existence, connecting the mountain's edge to the floating island. It was a clear, unspoken challenge.
The arrogant fool. He was always one for theatrics.
Karoo stepped onto the bridge without hesitation. It held firm beneath his weight. Luna followed, her hand hovering near the railing, which felt like cool, smooth glass. With every step, the distant thrum of the earth grew fainter, and the immense, silent presence of the sky grew stronger. It was a place of profound isolation, beautiful and terrible. The island was a smooth, flattened disk of obsidian-like rock, crisscrossed with veins of glowing, pale blue crystal. At its center stood a single, impossibly tall figure, his back to them. He was watching the stars. He was tall and slender, where Karoo was compactly powerful. He wore robes of a material that seemed spun from cloud stuff, shifting from white to gray to the deep indigo of the stratosphere. His skin was pale, like marble, and his long hair was the silver white of cirrus clouds. He spoke without turning, his voice not a growl like Karoo's, but a clear, melodic chime that carried effortlessly on the windless air. "Brother Zhen, you have brought the grime and noise of the deep places to my sanctuary. To what do I owe this unwelcome intrusion?
Kalis, cease this farce and look at me. The veil is tearing. The sleeper grows restless. Your vigil is needed.
Kalis finally turned. His face was unnervingly beautiful, ageless and sharp, but his eyes were the most startling part. They were a solid, luminous silver, like pools of mercury, holding no pupil, no iris, only the reflected light of distant galaxies. They held a chilling lack of emotion.
The veil has been tearing for centuries. The sleeper has always been restless. That is the nature of things. A cycle of dreaming and waking, of peace and chaos. Why should I descend back into the mud to fight a battle that can never be truly won? His silver eyes slid from Karoo to Luna, and for the first time, a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, disturbed his placid features.
And you have brought a mortal with you, one who stinks of loam and iron. Quaint. Has your solitude finally driven you mad, old panther? My name is Luna, and the mud you're talking about is the world that's about to be devoured by nightmares because you'd rather stare at stars.
The words were out before she could stop them. Kalis raised a single, perfect eyebrow. A sudden, powerful gust of wind erupted from him, slamming into Luna and threatening to hurl her from the island. But Karoo was faster, moving in front of her, a bulwark of shadow that absorbed the force.
She has more courage than you have memory, Sky Warden. She is of the old blood. The mountain speaks to her. She is the reason we found you. The old blood? A faded echo. The pacts are dust. Her presence here is an irrelevance. The world below is a frantic, short-lived thing. It will die. Another will grow. I have watched stars be born, and I have watched them die. The struggles of mayflies on a speck of dust do not concern me. It is not just the world of men that will be unmade. It is the sleeper itself. If the nightmares consume it, if it wakes not to creation but to madness, everything will be annihilated. Your precious sky, your silent stars, all of it. There will be no purity left, only screaming chaos. A risk I am willing to take. My peace is worth more than your panic. He flicked his wrist, and the air crackled. Spears of lightning, condensed and sharp as glass, materialized around him, aimed at Karoo. Karoo, in turn, crouched low, his hands igniting with the same black fire Luna had seen in the cavern. Then I will drag you from your perch and remind you of the ground by force. You are weakened, Sentinel. I can feel it. Your connection to the heart is strained. Here, in my domain, you are nothing but a dying ember. Kalis was right. The battle was short and brutal. He didn't move from his spot, orchestrating the winds and lightning like a conductor. He sent razor-sharp gales that forced Karoo onto the defensive, and forked bolts of lightning that exploded against the Panther Sentinel's hastily summoned shields of shadow. Karoo was powerful, a force of raw terrestrial fury, but he was grounded. Kalis owned the air. Every lunge Karoo made was deflected by a precise blast of kinetic force. Every burst of black fire was smothered by a localized vacuum. Finally, Kalis summoned a miniature cyclone, a spinning vortex of wind and debris that lifted Karoo from his feet and slammed him against the obsidian floor. The black flames on his hands guttered and died. He lay there, panting, the fiery sigils on his skin flickering weakly. Kalis looked down at him, his silver eyes devoid of triumph. It was not a victory to him, merely a confirmation of fact. Your time is over, brother.
Your duty has consumed you. Go back to your hole and die with your precious world. Leave me to my peace."
He turned his back on them, preparing to dismiss them, to dissolve the bridge and leave them stranded. Luna, who had been watching in horrified silence, knew she had only one chance. She couldn't fight him. But Karoo had said it himself. She was the voice. He was the fist. The fist had failed. It was her turn. She walked to the center of the floating island, ignoring the dismissive glare from Kalis. She knelt, pressing her bare palms flat against the cold, smooth obsidian. It felt dead, disconnected, just as Karoo had said. Kalis had scoured it of its memory. But it was still rock. It was still born of the earth. It still had roots, even if they were spiritual, stretching down through the empty air to the mountain below. Closing her eyes, she didn't just reach for the power of the mountain. She poured herself into the stone beneath her. She sent her consciousness, her will, down an invisible thread, following the memory of the rock. She bypassed Kaelis's skyward domain and plunged deep, deep into the core of the mountain range, back to the heart chamber she had left only hours before. She found the heart crystal, a blazing turquoise sun in her mind. And she did what Karoo couldn't. She didn't just draw on its power, she asked. She showed it the floating island, the arrogant guardian, the dying embers of its sentinel. She showed it the weakening veil, the nightmare creatures, the threat to the sleeper itself. She became a conduit, a translator, conveying the urgency of the moment not in words, but in pure feeling, in seismic resonance. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A wave of power, immense and ancient, surged up through the invisible connection. It wasn't the violent jolt she'd felt before. This was a deep, resonant chord of pure earth song, the concentrated essence of gravity, time, and stone. Back on the floating island, the pale blue veins in the obsidian began to pulse with a vibrant turquoise light. The entire island shuddered, not with wind, but with a deep tectonic tremor. A low hum filled the air, the sound of a mountain awakening from a long slumber. Kalis spun around, his silver eyes wide with shock. The serene emptiness of his sanctuary was being invaded. "What is this? What are you doing?" "Reminding you." Her voice was different, layered with the resonance of the deep rock. The obsidian floor beneath Kalis's feet began to glow, and images formed in the light, projected for him to see. Not images from Luna's mind, but from the mountains. He saw the formation of the range, the slow, patient grinding of rock over eons. He saw the pacts being made, his ancestors swearing fealty not to the sky, but to the living world. He saw Karoo, young and proud, taking his post as the panther sentinel. He saw himself standing beside him, swearing the same oath. The memory was thick with the scent of pine and damp soil and the sacred fire of their creation. Then the vision shifted. The turquoise light was corrupted by sickly violet. He was forced to feel the nightmares seeping through the veil, the tearing, grasping hunger of forgotten things, the psychic scream of a world on the verge of being unmade. It was not a distant problem. It was here. It was a poison seeping into the very stone he stood upon. No. He stumbled back, clutching his head. The serene confidence had shattered. The earth he had tried so hard to forget was screaming at him, showing him the price of his apathy. The island, his symbol of detachment, had become a prison, a direct conduit for the world's pain. The sky above seemed to press down on him, no longer a symbol of freedom, but a vast, empty ceiling. The turquoise light faded.
Luna collapsed, the effort draining her completely. She lay on the stone, gasping for air, the connection severed. Karoo, his strength partially restored by the surge of earth power, pushed himself to his feet. He walked over to Kalis, who was now on his knees, his silver hair falling around his face. The Sky Warden was trembling.
You cannot forget the ground you were born from, brother. No matter how high you fly, brother.
Kalis looked up, and for the first time, Luna saw a storm in his mercury eyes. It was grief. It was shame. It was the crushing weight of a duty remembered too late. The rot, it's deeper than I imagined. I thought my detachment was strength. It was just ignorance. He rose slowly to his feet, his ethereal grace replaced by a heavy weariness. He looked at Luna, his gaze no longer mocking, but filled with a grudging respect. You, the little echo of the old blood. You are louder than I thought. He then turned to Karoo, the decision solidifying in his expression. My strength is not of the earth, but I will lend it to this fight. The sky will answer the call of the ground, this once. But we are not enough. 2 sentinels and a mortal voice? The veil is failing across the globe. We know. Who is next? Where did the others hide themselves? Kalis walked to the edge of his floating island and stared down, not at the mountains, but west, toward the unseen horizon. The wind that was his to command coiled around him, bringing him whispers from afar. One sought solace not in height but in depth, not in air but in water. She submerged her duty in the crushing silence of the abyss. She let the currents wash away her name, her promise. We must go to the coast, to the ship graveyard where the land gives way to the sea. We must find Morwen, the tide singer. An uneasy alliance of 3 now stood on the floating rock, a shattered sanctuary. The silent panther, the chastened warden of the sky, and the mortal geologist who was rapidly becoming something more. Below them, the world seemed to hold its breath, and the distant, silent scream of the sleeper's nightmares felt closer than ever before. Kalis let out a long, slow breath. It was not a sigh of weariness, but of release, as if he were exhaling a millennium of self-imposed stillness. The air around him shimmered, and the bridge of solidified wind connecting them to the mountain dissolved into glittering motes of light. The journey to the coast is significant. We will not walk. The ground is your path, Zhen, not mine. And the mortal, she would not survive the trek. And we will not take the shadow paths. They are frayed near the sea. Too many sleeping things have drowned there. Their dreams are thin and treacherous. Kalis gave a curt nod, a gesture of concession. He raised his hands, palms up, as if weighing the very air between them. The clouds that had perpetually swirled beneath the floating island began to churn and rise, not in a chaotic storm, but with a deliberate architectural purpose. They flowed upwards, weaving together like threads on a loom, coalescing around the edges of the obsidian disk. Luna watched, mesmerized, as a vessel took shape. It was a skiff, sleek and elegant, formed not of wood or steel, but of densely compacted cloud stuff, the color of pearl and dusk. It had no sail, no oars, no engine. It simply was. It bobbed silently at the edge of the island, a craft born of breath and altitude. It will suffice. It is faster than any bird and will draw no unwanted attention from the world below. Step aboard. He was the first to embark, his movements fluid, his cloudy robes merging with the material of the vessel. He stood at the prow, a silver-haired figurehead staring into the vastness of the night. Karoo hesitated for a fraction of a second. Luna could see the tension in his shoulders, the deep-seated reluctance of a creature of stone and shadow to commit himself to the unbound emptiness of the sky. He glanced at Luna, a silent question in his fiery eyes. She gave him a small, encouraging nod.
With a low growl of resignation, the panther sentinel stepped onto the cloud skiff. His weight, which seemed to carry the gravity of the mountain itself, made the vessel dip slightly, but it held firm. Luna followed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The floor of the skiff felt both solid and yielding, like walking on densely packed snow. There was no railing. There was nothing between her and a fall of several thousand feet but the will of the Sky Warden.
"Hold fast." It was the only warning she got. The skiff surged forward, silent and swift, leaving the floating island behind. The eyrie, Kaelus's sanctuary and prison, dwindled into a dark shape against the stars and was soon lost to sight. They flew west, a silent arrow in the stratosphere. The world below was a tapestry of darkness pricked with the golden lights of towns and cities, a world Luna was suddenly seeing from the perspective of a god.
Morwen, the Tide Singer. Why did she leave? Was it for the same reason as you? Did she grow tired of her duty?
Kaelus did not turn from his vigil at the prow. His voice was carried back to them on a controlled current of air, clear and devoid of warmth. My reasons were philosophical, hers were emotional. Morwen did not detach, she shattered. Where I sought the clarity of the void, she embraced the chaos of the depths. She did not tire of her duty, she was broken by it. She was the sentinel of the Western Vale, where the land met the great ocean. It was a thin place, always. The sleeper's dreams there were of water, of endless, formless things. When the nightmares began to seep through in earnest, they took forms she could not fight with force alone. What kind of forms? It was Kaelus who answered, his tone now laced with a faint trace of remembered disgust. They were echoes, phantoms born of drowned sailors and sunken ships, given substance by the sleeper's dread. They were whispers of loss, currents of despair. Morwen's gift was to hear the song of the tides, the rhythm of the world's waters. But the nightmares turned her gift into a curse. The ocean became a choir of the dead, singing of their terror and grief directly into her soul. She tried to silence them. She built walls of coral and raised tides to scour the rifts clean. But you cannot punch a memory. You cannot burn a feeling of sorrow. Her heart, which was always too open, flooded. She abandoned her post and fled into the deepest trench she could find, hoping the pressure would crush the songs from her mind. A heavy silence settled over the skiff, broken only by the whisper of their passage through the upper atmosphere. Luna wrapped her arms around herself, the thin air biting at her skin. She looked at the two ancient beings with her. One had fled into the sky to escape the world's messy reality. The other had fled into the sea to escape its overwhelming pain. Only Haru had remained, a lone rock in a crumbling fortress. So, if force won't work, how do we convince her? That is the question, isn't it? Her power is woven into the ocean itself. In her domain, she is an elemental force. We cannot drag her out. We cannot command her. We can only appeal to what remains of the woman she was. We appeal to the sentinel. The Tide Singer may be lost, but the guardian is still in there. It has to be. They flew on.
The stars wheeled overhead, and the dark quilt of the earth below began to soften at its eastern edge with the first hint of dawn. Luna felt a strange sense of temporal displacement. A single night had encompassed a journey into the Earth's heart, a confrontation on a floating mountain, and now a flight across a continent. Her old life, the life of spreadsheets and seismographs, felt like a distant, half-forgotten dream. As the sun's first rays breached the horizon, painting the clouds below in hues of rose and gold, a new scent reached them. It was sharp and wet, the smell of salt and brine. Ahead, the land ended, giving way to the vast, glittering expanse of the Atlantic. "We are here." The cloud skiff began a slow, graceful descent. They spiraled down from the cold, clear heights, plunging into the thick, humid air of the coast. A dense bank of fog rolled in from the ocean, a solid wall of gray that swallowed them whole. The world was reduced to swirling vapor. The temperature rose, and the air grew heavy with moisture. Luna could feel the deep, resonant thrum of the mountain fading completely, replaced by a different kind of rhythm. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was the slow, inexorable pull and release of the tide, a vast, liquid breathing that felt ancient and sorrowful. The skiff slowed and came to a stop, hovering a few feet above a stretch of sand and dark, wet rock. They had arrived. The ship graveyard was a place of profound decay. Skeletal hulls of old fishing trawlers and long-forgotten cargo ships lay half buried in the sand, their iron bones bleeding rust into the water. Jagged ribs of wood pointed toward the foggy sky like the fingers of pleading hands. The masts of sunken vessels pierced the surface of the placid inlet, draped in thick shrouds of seaweed and barnacles. The air was thick with the sounds of the place, the mournful cry of gulls, the gentle lapping of water against rotting wood, and a constant low groaning as the ancient wrecks settled deeper into their watery graves. This place, it is a wound. The air is heavy with endings. He stepped from the skiff, his feet landing on the damp sand with a soundless grace. The vessel behind him dissolved, its cloudy substance absorbed into the surrounding fog. Carew landed with a heavier thud, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. He scanned the area, his fiery eyes cutting through the mist, every line of his body taut with suspicion. She chose her tomb well. 1,000 ghosts linger here already. Her own would be one among many. Luna stepped onto the beach, and the change in atmosphere was immediate and visceral. It was like stepping into a pressure chamber. The weight of the water, the immense, crushing force of the entire ocean seemed to press down on her spirit. It was a feeling of profound, bottomless grief. The mountain had been a source of strength, of life. The ocean felt like a repository of loss. I can feel her. Not like I felt you, Kalis. This isn't a presence, it's an absence. A hole where a person used to be. They began to walk, their footsteps the only sharp sounds in the muffled landscape. They moved deeper into the graveyard, navigating between the carcasses of ships. The fog was disorienting, playing tricks with distance and shape. A looming hull would resolve into a much smaller fishing boat, while a piece of driftwood would momentarily take on a humanoid form. The wind is useless here. It carries no whispers, only the salt spray. It's like trying to listen for a single voice in a constant scream of static. There are no shadows to walk. The light is too diffuse. The ground is saturated. It holds no clear path. We search for her as mortals do. They were stripped of their primary advantages, brought down to the same level in this oppressive, sorrow-drenched place. Luna closed her eyes, trying to do as she had done before, to reach out with that new sense she possessed. She pushed past the feeling of grief and listened.
Beneath the crying gulls and the sighing waves, there was something else. A sound that wasn't a sound. A melody played on an instrument of pressure and depth. It was a song, faint and achingly sad. It spoke of lost light, of the cold silence of the abyss, of the peace that comes with forgetting one's own name. It was the tide song, and it was a lullaby of self-erasure. That way, I can hear her. She pointed toward a larger wreck, a massive, rusted freighter that lay on its side like a beached whale, its hull breached in a dozen places. As they approached, they saw that the decay here was different. It wasn't just rust and rot. Strange, bioluminescent corals grew in intricate, spiraling patterns across the iron plates, pulsing with a soft blue-green light that was visible even in the fog. Anemones, iridescent and otherworldly, clung to the railings, their tentacles waving gently in the air as if they were still underwater. This is her garden. She has cultivated her misery. The song was stronger here, emanating from the dark, water-filled holds of the ship. It wasn't just a sound in Luna's mind anymore. It was a vibration in the air, a low thrum that resonated in their bones and made their teeth ache. As they stood before a great, gaping hole in the freighter's side, the water inside began to stir. The water pooled on the deck and within the holds wasn't just sloshing with the tide. It was rising, defying gravity, forming into cohesive shapes. Tendrils of seawater, thick as pythons, snaked out from the darkness. They were followed by larger forms, humanoid figures sculpted from the churning brine, their features indistinct and constantly shifting. They were water elementals, but they were imbued with a chilling purpose. From the depths of the wreck, a voice echoed, layered and fluid, like many voices speaking at once from beneath a great weight of water. You bring the noise of the surface, the screaming of the sky and the grinding of the stone. My silence will not be broken. Leave this place of endings. Drown your purpose and be at peace.
Morwen, sister, your silence is a lie. It is the veil that is breaking. Your duty calls.
The water constructs surged forward. They did not run. They flowed across the sand with terrifying speed. Kalis reacted instantly. He thrust his hands forward, and a blade of pure wind, sharp and focused, sliced through the nearest elemental. The creature burst apart in a shower of spray, but immediately began to reform, the water drawing itself back together. They cannot be cut. They have no solid form. Karoo roared, his hands igniting with black fire. He didn't try to cut the creatures, but to boil them. He met one head-on, enveloping it in a sphere of intense heat. The water hissed and steamed, the elemental dissolving into a cloud of scalding vapor. But the fog itself seemed to feed it, the moisture in the air condensing and flowing back into the remaining constructs, strengthening them. Your fire is an intruder here, little panther. Your air is an insult. The water remembers all things. It remembers how to quench a flame. It remembers how to suffocate a breath. A massive wave, born not from the ocean, but from the will of the tide singer, erupted from the wreck. It wasn't aimed to crash down on them, but to envelop them. Kalis created a vortex of wind to hold it at bay, a swirling shield that sent spray flying in every direction. The sound of their warring elements was deafening, a hurricane battling a tsunami in the confines of the foggy beach. Luna stood behind the maelstrom, useless in the physical fight. She watched the two powerful sentinels being fought to a standstill by an enemy they couldn't touch. Force was failing again. She closed her eyes, shutting out the storm of wind and water, and focused on the song. It was no longer a lament. It was a dirge, a funeral march for a world she was trying to save. Morwen wasn't just pushing them away, she was trying to pull them down into her sorrow. Instead of fighting the feeling, Luna did the opposite. She let it in. She allowed the crushing grief, the bottomless despair of the Tide song, to wash over her. It was an agony, a torrent of loss that threatened to extinguish her own sense of self. But within that torrent, she felt the source. A single sharp point of pain, the memory that had shattered Morwen. A memory of a specific failure. A vision flashed in her mind. A coastline, not of sand, but of shimmering, crystalline beaches. A city, built of living coral, glowing under the waves. And then a rift of violet nightmare, tearing through the water, and the city's light being extinguished, its song falling silent, replaced by the screams of the things that came through.
It wasn't sailors. It wasn't the whispers of drowned men that broke you. Luna shouted, her voice cutting through the elemental roar. The battle faltered for a second. The pressure of the great wave lessened.
It was a city you were protecting, under the waves, the choral singers. You didn't just fail your duty, you lost your people. That's the song you're trying to drown.
A profound, terrible silence fell over the beach. The wave collapsed. The water elementals dissolved. The wind died down. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the real ocean. The song in Luna's mind had stopped. A figure emerged from the gaping hole in the freighter, stepping out of the shadows and into the gray light. She was tall and willowy, her form seeming to shift and sway like kelp in a current. Her skin had a pearlescent, translucent quality, and her long hair, the color of seafoam green, floated around her as if she were still underwater. Tiny, glowing polyps, like the coral on the wreck, clung to her skin and clothes. Her eyes were the color of the deep ocean, holding an impossible depth of sorrow. She was beautiful and terrifying, a queen of a drowned kingdom.
You have no right to that memory. You have no right to sing that name.
Her voice was no longer a layered echo, but a single, clear tone trembling with rage and pain. The entire inlet of water began to recede, pulling back from the beach with an unnatural speed, gathering its power. The skeletons of the ships were left fully exposed on the wet sand. Far out, the water was rising into a single colossal wave, a true tidal wave, aimed at the shore with the intent to scour it clean of intruders, memories, and everything else.
Mortal, what have you done?
What I had to. Her fight isn't with you, it's with her own past. And she's going to drown us all with it if we don't remind her there's something else worth fighting for. Luna stood her ground, facing down the ghost of a sentinel and the towering wave of her grief made manifest. The fist had failed. The voice had spoken a terrible truth. Now came the reckoning. The world held its breath. The water, a liquid mountain range crowned with foam, blotted out the sky. It was not a natural force. It was a weaponized emotion. A final, definitive statement of grief aimed to erase everything. The sound was a deep, gut-wrenching roar that was felt more than heard, a vibration that shook the very atoms of the air.
By the silent stars, she will unmake the entire coast.
Kalis threw his arms out, his face a mask of strained concentration. The air before them began to spin, a vortex of wind forming a desperate, concave shield against the approaching apocalypse. Gulls caught in his power were flung screaming into the sky. But it was like trying to halt a charging behemoth with a net of silk.
The sheer mass of the water was too great. His winds could only tear at its surface, whipping spray into a horizontal blizzard. "Luna, behind me!" Karoo moved, not to fight the wave, but to anchor himself. He slammed his feet into the wet sand, and shadows coalesced around him, digging deep into the earth like spectral roots. His purpose was singular: to become an unbreakable wall behind which Luna could survive the impact. But Luna didn't move. She didn't retreat. She stood between the two sentinels, her eyes fixed on the impossible wall of water. She didn't look afraid. Her expression was one of intense, focused fury, not at Morwen, but at the pain that drove her. This was not a battle of elements. It was an argument, and Morwen had just shouted. Now it was Luna's turn to answer. She dropped to one knee, slamming both palms flat against the saturated ground. The shock of it sent little sprays of sand jumping into the air. She closed her eyes and reached, not for the distant, solid heart of the mountains, but for the foundation of the very ground she knelt upon. She pushed her consciousness down, past the sand and silt, past the layers of sedimentary history, into the bedrock. She sought the continental shelf, the immense sloping shoulder of the landmass that held the ocean at bay. She could feel it, the immense, slow pressure, the memory of ancient tides, the cold, silent strength of rock that had borne the weight of the sea for millennia. Morwen was the voice of the water, a transient, powerful thing of surface and storm. But Luna was becoming the voice of the stone, the eternal, unyielding fact of the world itself. She didn't just ask for its power, she commanded it. A tremor began, low and deep. The skeletal shipwrecks around them rattled, their rusted hulls groaning in a new kind of agony. The ground beneath them vibrated, not with the terror of the wave's approach, but with a rising, defiant power. The vibration became a shudder, the shudder a violent quake. "What is she?" Kalis's question was cut off by a deafening crack, the sound of the world breaking. 100 yards out, where the shallow inlet met the deeper channel, the surface of the sea began to boil. Not with heat, but with geological violence. The seabed itself was rising. A ridge of dark, primeval rock, slick with seaweed and primordial ooze, burst through the waves. It rose higher and higher, a jagged spine of new land erupting from the depths. Barnacle-encrusted plates of bedrock ground against each other, pushing upward with irresistible force. It was not a wall of stone being raised, it was the planet itself flexing a muscle. A new headland, a raw and angry peninsula, was born in a matter of seconds, directly in the path of Morwen's grief. The tidal wave, in all its terrible majesty, met the new earth. The impact was an explosion of physics. The sound was absolute, a singular, catastrophic roar that annihilated all other noise. A plume of white water, thousands of feet high, was thrown into the sky, momentarily eclipsing the sun. The sheer force of the collision sent a shock wave that flattened the fog and cracked the hulls of Anira's ships. Caiulus's windshield shattered instantly. Karoo was thrown to one knee, his shadow anchors straining. The main force of the wave was broken, its energy spent against the unyielding stone. But a torrent of water, still hundreds of feet high, cascaded over the new rock wall. It fell upon them not as a wave, but as a waterfall, a deluge of cold, crushing brine. Karoo's form became a dome of pure shadow over Luna, the water splitting and flowing around them. Kalis was swept off his feet, tumbling through the churning chaos, only stopping himself by creating a gale-force anchor of wind to the nearest wreck.
Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. The water receded, dragged back into the churning, confused sea. The new ridge of rock stood steaming in the gray light, a permanent, jagged scar on the landscape. The ship graveyard was utterly transformed, scoured clean. Many of the smaller wrecks were gone, dragged out to sea or smashed to pieces. The sand was a slurry of mud and debris. Luna collapsed, her strength gone. The connection to the earth snapped, leaving her feeling small and hollow. Karoo's shadow dome dissolved, and he stood over her, his breath coming in ragged pants. Kayla strode towards them, his cloud-spun robes soaked and clinging to his slender frame, his silver eyes wide with an emotion Luna had not seen in them before, utter disbelief. Across the ruined beach, Morwen stood alone. The fury had drained from her, leaving behind a hollow-eyed shock. Her greatest expression of power, her ultimate wall of sorrow, had been met and broken by a force she did not understand. The water, her element, her very being, lapped uselessly at the foot of the new, defiant stone. She looked small, isolated, a queen whose kingdom had just been proven to have borders. The three of them walked toward her, their boots sinking into the muck. The air was still and heavy with the smell of ozone, salt, and disturbed earth. They stopped 20 feet from her. The silence stretched, thick and profound. "The stone will always outlast the storm, sister." His voice was low, not accusatory, but filled with a deep, ancient sadness. Morwen flinched at the word sister, as if it were a physical blow. "You should not have come. This was a place of quiet endings. Now it is just broken." "It was broken before we arrived." Morwen's gaze snapped to Kalis. He took a step forward, his usual arrogance gone, replaced by a strange, quiet intensity. He looked at the wreckage, at the new, raw stone, at her. "I built myself a sanctuary of nothingness, Morwen. A place where I could watch the stars and forget the grinding of the world. I polished the stone until it forgot its own name. I thought it was peace. I was wrong. It was a cage, a beautiful, silent cage." He gestured around them, at the decaying ships and the oppressive gray sky. "You have done the same. You have built a sanctuary of sorrow. You thought if you submerged yourself deep enough in your own pain, you could forget the world that caused it. This is your cage. It is just as empty as mine was. You know nothing of what I have lost." Her voice cracked, and the sea behind her began to churn again, responding to her renewed anguish. A vision flooded their minds, projected from her, a memory sharp as broken coral. They saw it, the city under the waves, Kelthara. It wasn't stone, but living, singing coral that grew in luminous spires, catching the filtered sunlight. The beings who lived there, the coral singers, were graceful, amphibious humanoids whose voices were the song of the city, a constant, harmonious thrum that resonated with the very currents of the ocean. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and peace. Then the vision soured. A tear in the veil, a bleeding wound of violet wrongness opened in the water. From it poured not creatures of substance, but of anti-existence, things made of psychic silence and hungry despair. They didn't attack the coral singers, they consumed their song, leaving behind husks of silent gray coral and bodies that simply stopped, their inner light extinguished. The memory was filled with Morwen's own frantic, desperate attempts to fight, her tides having no effect on the song-eaters, her water constructs passing through them like smoke.
It ended with the final, psychic scream of her people as the last of their light and music was devoured, leaving only a dead city and an ocean filled with an unbearable silence. The vision faded, leaving them all shaken. Kalis had taken a step back, his face pale. Karoo stood like a statue of obsidian, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. That is the silence I live with, the silence where their song used to be. Do not speak to me of cages. My grief is all I have left of them. It is their monument.
Then it's a poor monument.
Everyone looked at Luna. She had pushed herself to her feet, though she swayed with exhaustion. She walked forward, her boots making soft sucking sounds in the mud, until she stood directly before the Tide Singer. A monument is something you build so others can remember. You've built this place so you can forget. You aren't honoring them, Morwen. You are using their memory as a stone to drown yourself with. You are a mayfly, a speck of dust. You cannot comprehend the scale of my loss.
I don't have to. I just have to know what comes next. The things that took your people, they are coming for everyone else. The silence they brought to Ny'Athra, that is the silence they want for the entire world, for the mountains, the sky, and the sea. An absolute final ending. Your quiet is the very thing we are fighting against.
Luna took another step, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. You want to build them a monument? Then help us build a fortress. Help us save the world they were a part of. Help us ensure that their song wasn't the last one to be silenced. Fight, not because of your duty, but because of them. Make their memory a weapon, not a tomb. Morwen stared at Luna, her deep ocean eyes filled with a maelstrom of emotions. The rage was gone, the grief was still there, but now it was warring with something else, a flicker of purpose. The logic of Luna's words was a stone cast into the deep pool of her sorrow, and the ripples were spreading. I cannot hear the song of the tides anymore, only their echoes. My power is stained with it. I am not the sentinel I was.
None of us are. Karoo spoke, his voice rough with an empathy he rarely showed.
My fire is dimmed by centuries of solitude. Kalis blinded himself with starlight. We are all of us faded, broken, but we are what is left, and we are not enough. We need you, Morwen, stained or not.
Morwen looked from face to face. The grim panther, her oldest brother. The arrogant sky warden humbled and returned. And the mortal, the impossible mortal who spoke with the authority of the earth itself. They were not demanding, they were pleading. For the first time in centuries, she was not alone in her misery.
Slowly, as if the gesture was unfamiliar and painful, she gave a single, sharp nod. The sea behind her, which had been churning in turmoil, calmed. The gray clouds overhead seemed to thin, just a fraction, allowing a sliver of pale sunlight to pierce the gloom.
The things that came for Ny'Athra, they were clever. They slipped through a flaw in the veil's weave, a harmonic dissonance. They are not all brute force. Some are whispers, some are plagues of thought. To fight them, we must understand the veil itself, and for that, there is only one who might remember the pattern of the loom.
Who? Where?
He did not flee from duty. He embraced a different aspect of it. He saw the rot of civilization, the way mortals built their fleeting lives on foundations of forgetfulness, and he chose to become a keeper of memories. He wove himself into the deepest roots of the oldest living things. He went where the earth's memory is green and growing, not cold and stone.
Cerne, the Forest Father. I thought he had faded into the green dream centuries ago. He has not faded. He has grown. He is no longer a single being, but a consciousness spread across 1,000 miles of ancient forest, a living network of root and leaf, bark and thorn. He remembers the old songs, the true names of things. He may know where the veil is weakest and why. Where do we find him? What forest?
In the place where the trees are oldest. A forest so vast and untouched that your kind has forgotten it exists, though it borders your own sprawling cities. The redwood heart of the Pacific Northwest.
Across the continent again. My skiff can carry us, but it will be a long journey. And entering Cerne's domain will not be simple. He does not welcome those who carry the scent of stone and steel.
Morwen looked at the new, raw headland Luna had raised. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was a sad, broken thing, but it was a smile nonetheless. The land has a new voice. Perhaps he will listen to her. And the journey, we will not take the sky road alone. The sea is my path, and it is faster than the wind. She turned and walked toward the now calm water. With her first step, the sea seemed to rise to meet her, swirling around her ankles. She raised her arms, and the water responded. From the depths, a great shape began to surface. It was not a boat. It was a creature, a living vessel sculpted from coral, shell, and solidified seawater, pulled by immense, silent beasts of the deep whose forms were only hinted at by the disturbance of the water. It was a chariot of the tides, ancient and powerful. An uneasy alliance of 4 now stood on the ravaged coast, a sentinel of shadow and stone, a sentinel of wind and starlight, a sentinel of tide and sorrow, and a mortal woman who was their voice, their anchor, and their catalyst. The task before them was immense, the enemy a formless tide of nightmare. But they were no longer scattered fragments. They were a shattered whole, beginning to piece itself back together.